and enthusiasts. Our mission is to reduce the carbon in our built environment and to impact people who are in positions to make decisions about buildings and our built environment. Today, we are welcoming 6 panelists from Kaplan Thompson, 475, Scott Simons, Zachau, Briburn, and the Ecology School. And we're really happy to have some sponsorship from our participants, as well as from Materially Better, Red to Green, a consultant in Western Mass that helps projects go through the certification process with the Living Building Challenge. Passive House, as you all know, is one part of a fantastic built environment. Living Building pushes it farther, and we're really excited to hear from our panelists today about the Ecology School specifically and Living Building in general. So I guess I want to hand it off to Drew to start. Is Drew there? Yeah.
Thanks, Naomi. It's an honor to be doing this presentation on the Riverbend Farm project. I wanted to give all the participants out there and attendees a little bit of background information on the Ecology School. We're a residential ecology center, learning center. We were founded back in 1998. I was one of the co-founders. And now as president and CEO, I've been involved for about 5 years in this incredible dream to build our own campus. For the first 18 years, we were renting a summer camp facility, do spring and fall program with schools. But now we have the chance with our own site to do much more. As you can see in the background behind me, we have this gorgeous 105-acre farm. I'm standing right now in my office. It's in the 1794 farmhouse, and we have an 1840s barn. And our hope here in transitioning is that we'll have a year-round educational facility where living and learning go side by side, that people will be living in the dorm that's being constructed and taking meals in the dining commons, and then exploring the facility and the whole property over the 3.5 acres of trails we already have. We also are going to do a full-scale agroecology farm, and agroecology is really the synthesis of taking the best concepts of ecology and applying that to the growing of the food. In fact, just yesterday, our farmer was tilling the soil down our lower field. So far, our programs for the past 21 years have been focused mainly on school programs in the spring and the fall. But our hope was that transitioning here to Riverbend Farm, that we could start to do more adult programs, do more food systems programs. And really, because our focus is teaching the science of ecology and the practice of sustainability, it was very hard for us for years to be renting sites that actually weren't very green, that were old camp buildings. And really long-term, what we wanted to do is to have our programs housed in top-of-the-line buildings where we could do programs for students, we could do summer camps, we can host other nonprofit organizations for conferences and retreats. So that really started coming together about 5 years ago when the Riverbend Farm came on the market. And over the past 5 years, we've been working toward this point. Right now, we're about halfway through construction. About 5 years ago, I reached out to Briburn, Scott Simons, and Kaplan and Thompson. I don't think they realized I was interviewing them. I sat down with all 3 firms and had incredible chats. And when I was done talking to all 3 firms, I couldn't make a decision. I thought they were all incredible. And at that point, John Rooks, who was on our board, and his soap group had done sustainability and advertising and marketing for all 3 firms. John Rooks said, ask if they'll work together, because no one had done Living Building Challenge in the state of Maine. So I asked if Briburn and Scott Simons and Kaplan Thompson would work together on the project, and they said yes. So I think it just fit in with our whole mission at the Ecology School, that we're educational. If we could give the chance for architecture firms to also be part of this new education, because no one has done Living Building Challenge yet. And what's interesting about Living Building Challenge, As our development director, Brian Matt, likes to call it, it's like LEED certification on steroids, which I've been told not to use. That sounds not as good as saying the most advanced sustainable building and development in the world. So I'll use that phrase instead. But it really is incredibly rigorous building certification. That's not just about the building materials and energy efficiency. It's about equity and beauty. In fact, the International Living Future Institute that does the living building certification uses the analogy of a flower in a field. A flower in a field, of course, doesn't take, it gives as much to the environment in terms of putting out oxygen and holding down the soil and being beautiful as it takes from the environment. So that's the aspiration with Living Building Challenge. And when we looked at what the certification for Living Building Challenge was, including, as Naomi already mentioned, passive house construction is an important part of Living Building Challenge. Not only net energy, basically getting all our energy on site through sustainable solar panels, but also net energy, 105% of our energy needs. So we'll actually be putting energy out on the grid. As I started to talk to the architects, it became this amazing collaboration where Kaplan Thompson and Briburn and Scott Simons, and then we welcomed in Richardson Associates as landscape architects to really envision a campus and what it could be. And the interesting thing about this property you're looking at, you can see it's a gorgeous rural property with a mixture of farm fields and forest, is that the majority of the property, 96 of the 105 acres, is under easement with Maine Farmland Trust. So it's a very restrictive easement that on that 96 acres, you can only do education, scientific research, farming, and recreation, which is basically a huge part of what the Ecology School does. And then basically the driveway and the farmyard area around it, that acres, is the developable lot that we're doing the construction of 9,000 square foot dormitory building and a 7,000 square foot dining commons. So really, you know, I'll let the architects go more into the whole design part of things, but basically as we transition into the campus toward the end of the year, it gives us a chance to really make that connection between the dynamics of how a natural ecosystem functions and how a building system or how a food system functions too. So we're really excited about the Ecology School at Riverbend Farm and our campus, and really breaking new ground by being the first buildings that will achieve living building certification in the state of Maine. A broader certification we did, I just want to throw out too, is there's a Living Community Challenge, which actually also adds things like farming, community resilience, and transportation, and working mainly with Kaplan Thompson, Danielle Foisey, who's on the call. She's been working on our Living Community Challenge Master Plan, which is a vision not only for the buildings, but the whole property itself and how we'll interact with the local economy, with the local Saco municipality, and with our program participants. But that Living Community Challenge Master Plan just got approved a couple months ago, and it's the first Living Community Challenge Master Plan approved in the world. So all of us involved in the project are so excited about that, is that we're not only breaking ground in Maine, but also in New England, nationally, and even internationally. So that's really exciting. I think that's enough. I don't want to overload it with how much the Ecology School is doing. We love working with kids and adults, and we've had 187,000 people come through our programs in the last 20 years, and we look forward to the next 170, 80,000 and more over the coming decades as we teach about resilience and community and sustainability. Back to you, Naomi.
So, Naomi, should we put up the Danielle, or should it be you right at this point?
However you guys want to do it. I see you have the slides up. That's perfect. A little introduction to living buildings specifically and the petals. Thanks.
Yep.
So Danielle?
Yep. Can everyone can see my screen?
We can't see
Oh.
a screen yet. That looks good.
Okay. So as Drew mentioned, he hired 3 architects and only 2 buildings. So we had to divide up how that work was going to be done. Briburn was the design lead for the dormitory, as well as energy modeling, Scott Simon's Architects for the Commons building, and I'm Danielle Foisey at Kaplan Thompson Architects, and our office did overall coordination and Living Building Challenge and Living Community Challenge certification. So as Drew mentioned, the Ecology School set the ambitious goal to achieve Living Building Challenge certification for the new dorm and commons, as well as Living Community Challenge for the entire site. Living Building is a rigorous system of design that requires compliance with some of the highest sustainable standards in order to catalyze change within the building industry. And the idea is to create an environment that is positive and regenerative impacts. And again, as Drew mentioned, there's the Living Building uses the metaphor of the flower as a goal for the built environment to achieve, since they are adapted to the climate, harvest their own energy, and are pretty to look at, which is a fitting metaphor and what we all want our buildings to look like. There are 7 performance areas called petals that need to be achieved for certification. And within those 20 imperatives, this includes 105% of energy that is consumed by the buildings to be offset by on-site solar. 100% of water needs need to be managed on site, which in our case was relatively easy because the school's on a well. The material petal requires the use of non-toxic and low impact materials, which includes no PVC and all FSC wood products, even the glue lams and structural sheathing. And it's really trying to fundamentally change the materials we work with. Some of the chemicals that aren't allowed in LBC buildings, such as PVC, are known pollutants to the environment, harm construction and factory workers, and are known human carcinogens. And some of the petals are performance-based calculations and are a bit more objective, and such as energy, whereas others are a bit more abstract, such as the health and happiness petal. So for health and happiness, the project must intentionally integrate biophilic elements into the design, meaning incorporate ideas such as what does the building sound like, and what does it feel like, and how does it change through the seasons, in order to make the built environment more enjoyable to be in and less sterile, because we spend so much of our time indoors instead of outdoors. And so part of this, we had an on-site charrette where the Ecology School, the design team, educators, farmer got together and just brainstormed how can we incorporate some of these elements into the design. And here's an example of some of the sketches that were produced that day. Our goal was to go for quantity, and even if only a few of the ideas stuck, it would be a better building because of it. And so one of the elements that was incorporated was including skylights in the commons to help bring in the sound of rain, a cutout in the overhang of the commons where you could see the solar panel on the roof up above, which would allow for some filtered and diffused lighting as you walked underneath, and also showcase the energy system. And overall, the goal of Living Building is to have a holistic view of the building and construction process to improve the quality of life of not only those who occupy the final building product, but those who work in factories that produce the building materials, those who construct with those materials, the surrounding neighbors who benefit from having a living community as an educational hub in their neighborhood. And we want to set an example of how sustainable living can be achieved. And we're really excited that the Ecology School has taken on this tremendous task of being the first living community compliant master plan ever. And it's just a really fabulous project to work on and have right in our backyards. So I'll pass it off to Ryan and Chris at Scott Simons and Briburn to talk about the buildings that we're about to see on site. But just to give an idea of where the Ecology School is, it's in Saco, along the Saco River. Their original location that they were renting was on Ferry Beach. And this is the site pre-construction. And as Drew mentioned, this is the entire 100-ish acres owned by the Ecology School, of which the darker brown 96 acres is under a conservation easement with the Maine Farmland Trust. And the living community boundary is restricted to this white dashed line, which is basically the developable area. And I'll let Chris and Ryan take it away about the actual design.
Yeah, Ryan, are you taking this part? Or do you have control over the slides, Ryan?
I was trying to flip the videos through here. Just give me a second. Hi, everyone. Brian Canteros with Scott Simons Architects. This picture is actually picking up with the Richardson Associates site plan. The site plan was a collaborative team effort that was involved all of the design firms. And I really just wanted to take a moment here to sort of orient everyone before we go out in the field to understand some of the decisions and directions that led to the location and siting of buildings and the utilization of the site as it was. And this is just a sidebar that I wanted to mention. The stated mission of Living Building Challenge being sort of a market changing effort, it occurred to me that this project has had some really direct aspects with that, because I think we took an approach with the design of trying to source local materials to the greatest extent possible and using bio-based materials to the greatest extent possible. And it actually directly led to prefabricated walls being able to be FSC sourced. But to zoom back out, the orienting piece here, you can see in the next few slides, you can see the existing buildings and the new buildings in this overall site plan, plus all the way to the left, the future supplemental residence facilities. But the largest building is the Commons building, and the segmented building is the dorms up towards the north part of the site. Danielle, if you don't mind, just flip ahead to we'll go through the next couple of slides. This is the existing farmhouse in the existing farm. So as Drew had mentioned, it's the 1790s farmhouse in a large barn from 1840. Every time we went on site, one thing everyone reacts to and reacted to really well is the sequences of addition of the existing farmhouse were largely based around wisdom of sort of correct location relative to the grade in the fields and orientation to the south, with a really traditional farmer's porch facing off to the sloping hills to the river. That really became an identification of place and site and a design driver when we get into the commons. If we go to the next page, you'll see highlighted the new buildings. And one thing that's a little hard to see here is that there's a historic wing row that runs perpendicularly almost about the middle of the boundary of this development area, which divides it from the existing historic farmyard to the new development portion of the farmyard. And Chris, I think if you want to switch over and talk a bit about location of the dorm and the sequence of experience of the new portion, that would be terrific.
Sure. Yeah, it's very similar in the process to locating the commons as you talked about. I mean, it was a real digging into the site and figuring out what worked best for the school. And when we first started thinking, all of us together, about the dorms, our immediate impulse is to work with the sun and orient ourselves, perfectly south and take advantage of solar orientation. But the more we learned or discovered that we were going to be putting using the commons as the big power building for the, you know, solar panels, and then the rest would be on an array, and that the students wouldn't really occupy the buildings during the middle of the day. They'd be out in the field almost all the time. That the solar became less of a driver so much as the volumetric shapes of the dorms. And so we all of us together collectively love tucking those buildings into that windrow and preserving the agricultural space in front. And actually having a divided form of 3 different buildings, which actually works with the program for the ecology schools. They have different varying sizes of groups that come and go, and they can divide them up accordingly and easily. That's pretty much all I have on that. Back to you, Ryan. Or are we going to the field at this point?
I think that the purpose was to help orient everyone. And I just wanted to point out the direction and decision about the form of the building. It is sort of interesting. We're working with rather traditional forms, but for the commons perspective, it's a salt box, but inverted, because the low slope, instead of shielding north wind, becomes an ideal collection location, which we'll get into in more detail. And let me see if I can, Naomi, why don't I put it up to you really briefly, and then we can connect with John and
Adam.
Field.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I wanted to just pause for a moment and invite people to add in the chat box any questions that you might have for the panelists. In general, I think we're going to try to save the questions to the end. We have an agenda that's we're trying to maneuver between off-site, on-site, and on the screen. So I really invite everybody to participate in that way, and I see that a few have already. And I know that Adam and John must be listening in and preparing, but they're not. We still have a few more minutes. If there's anything else that we want to talk about specifically, the living buildings specifically on site, or any other, if you want to add any more pieces of this presentation, we have a couple minutes. Or if there are any questions, I suppose we could take those now too.
We have gotten a question through about the funding for the project, and that might be a good one for Drew. If you want to speak to a little bit the vision and dedication that you put to getting this project done really straddles both the belief that it's the right thing and all the challenges to get everything lined up. So I think that might be a good question if you have a couple minutes to speak to.
Sure. In essence, for the past 20 years, we've been a seasonal renter, renting other facilities to do our spring and fall programming. So moving from a somewhat mid-size nonprofit into a larger nonprofit, especially one that's never done a capital campaign. We were lucky early on in the project that we had 2 funding partners. We started working with CEI, Coastal Enterprises Incorporated, who helped us with the mortgage to buy the property. And then we qualified for USDA's rural development. They have a community facilities loan program, which is a fantastic low interest 40-year financing. So we were able to get that backing, and then Camden National Bank's doing the actual construction financing. So the overall, I mean, this is obviously a big, ambitious project. The price tag for the whole project itself to be up and running by the end of this year and being able to do programming is $14.1 million, and that includes the land acquisition. We're lucky in that we're already 90% funded. The USDA rural development loan was $8.66 million, and our financing from CEI is another $1.7. We are in the middle of a capital campaign, $3.6 million capital campaign, and already more than 2/3 of the way there. We've raised 2.4. So we're in the process now of raising another 1.2 million, and we're going to make a more official announcement of that in a few weeks about the whole capital campaign. I do want to just mention, in seeing those pictures of both the dorm and the dining hall, and you'll see this as Adam, Ruthie, our project manager from Zachau Construction, that, like with the dorm there, the windows are just these huge, massive, almost picture windows that look out. There's forest on both sides of the dorms. And then the shape of the dining commons itself references some of the shape of the farmhouse, whereas the dorm references more of the shape and the look of the barn themselves. So they fit right into the landscape. We're going to start the tour with Adam standing at the top of the hill overlooking the Saco River. The farmhouse itself has an incredible, the farmhouse porch has this amazing view where you just sit on the front porch and look down on the Saco River. Our property has a half a mile frontage on the Saco River. So the Saco River itself is a big defining part of the property. In fact, I remember the first time we had all the architects out, I think there were 9 or 10 architects all walking around the property with me and some of the other Ecology School staff. And it may have been Jesse Thompson. Someone made a mention that because of the topography of Riverbend Farm, you go 100 feet and you're either going up or down. It's very hilly and there's ravines. But I think Jesse said you go 100 feet at Riverbend Farm, it's a whole new site. So there's so many different view sheds. And I think both Briburn and Scott Simons have done such an amazing job placing those buildings up against, and I don't know if you can actually, with that overhead I'm seeing right now on the screen, is there a way to point to where the dining commons and where the dorm is going to be? Basically, if you're looking at the farmhouse, yeah, right there is where the dining common is going to be, and then the dorm is tucked up against those trees in the back. We've got some incredible trees on site. That's right in front of the farmhouse is an old sugar maple. We've got an ash, a white ash in front of it. So really, the architects designed right around the campus. So every tree, I mean, there's been minimal cutting of any trees on site. It's been really designing right around the farm campus itself. You're looking at that, there's that road more to the right of the picture that leads down to the lower production fields, which I think I mentioned our farmer was tilling just yesterday. So a lot of fields and a lot of amazing forests.
Well, Drew, thank you. I think that it looks like they're ready out on site. So why don't we swap the view over to Adam out on site.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Unfortunately, with the COVID-19 and the pandemic situation, you won't get to enjoy this view quite as well as it is on site. With that in mind, on the construction side, it's been a really interesting sequence as far as balancing normal traditional building with how to navigate this pandemic situation. So we're generally very fortunate on this site at this stage because we have 4 different structures as well as a lot of site works going on. So we're able to spread all of our subcontractors around. It'll get a little more challenging as we close in and get a bunch of subs doing the finishing work. We will have to enforce more mask wearing, and we already have hand wash stations, a number of other essentials. And again, more specific to right now, we've got John and I trying to stay 6 feet apart, and he has a mask. So he's waving. So let's spin this around and go for a tour of the site. There's the tree that Drew was just talking about, one of the old trees. As we come up here, you can see one of the petals is water resources and having a net positive amount of water, so recharging the system, and this is part of that process. So it's a giant retention pond. We over excavate it, that will get filled with a number of different substrates and soils and drainage materials, and then capped with some specific landscape plantings that allow water to infiltrate through and track through the whole site and essentially recharge the groundwater. And then this is the old farmhouse, or part of it. You might be able to see Drew in there. He could stick his hand out the window and wave. Over here is the commons. So we're a little further behind. You can see the dorms in the background. We've got the kitchen here. We've got a waterproof membrane. And one of the interesting aspects of the living building challenge with all the material selections is we have lots of products that are compliant and a lot that aren't. And this process is figuring out what we can use, essentially what the best product is, most environmentally friendly. With this, there's anything that's sticky is usually a challenge. So there's a lot of stickiness in this bitchethane, the Grace product, from the primers to the different adhesives and sealants to that specific membrane, as well as the drainage board. And some of those are better than others, and some manufacturers have better products than others, and not necessarily their full suite. So it has been a challenge navigating that, where you've got one manufacturer that has one item that's good and another that has another that's good, but they don't mix together. So anyway, we've landed with the Grace product here. If we wander a little further afield, you can see what will be the porch to the commons. And so this has a great view of the Saco River. I don't know if you can see it with in this footage. You'll be able to see the yellow iron, but maybe not the actual river. But the intention here is you'll be able to sit out, have a coffee or breakfast or any of your meals overlooking the water. And as Danielle said, there's a few punches in the porch roof, so you'll see the solar panels, and they'll be translucent, so you can look up through there. In the commons themselves, we're getting ready to do the slab. So this is part of the underslab insulation. We're using EPS, which still has some challenges with it from an environmental perspective, but it's much, much better than the blue board or the pink board that you're normally used to, the XPS or some of those other products which have really bad blowing agents in them. One of the options that we originally had was Glavel, which basically was pretty cost prohibitive. You're shipping it a long way. And this ended up being the better product. Pardon?
Could you explain what Glavel is?
Glavel's like a spun fiberglass kind of gravel. I mean, it's a fiberglass material that is used instead of other insulation. So obviously the underslab or foundation stuff, foundation insulation gets wet. So you need something that will stand up to those rigors. So you're a little limited until they come up with a compressed wood fiber board that can not rot underground. So this stretches across. We've got a few spread footers. That's what's going in here. You can start to see some little sprinklings of cast iron pipe. So this would be the serving area. The kitchen's behind us. And then the commons bathroom is over here. So one of the, as Danielle also mentioned, one of the materials that is really toxic, the production of it is PVC. So we can't use any PVC on site. So we've got cast iron for all the drain and waste pipe work. It's a little more challenging to put in. One of the benefits though, of course, is you won't hear any noise in the walls. So anyone that uses a shower or toilet, or you hear that drip sometimes in a wall of it hitting the PVC pipe, this is a really good sound deadening property. So one of those unique spin-offs that will have a net positive to the project as well. And if we spin up here, you can see the dorms coming into view. One of the other major challenges that we have on this project is the recycling and waste mitigation as part of the Living Building Challenge process. So I think we have 99% of all the waste we produce has to be recycled. Only 1% can actually go into the waste stream. So to put that in perspective, if we get one of the big 30-yard dumpsters, if we have 100 on this project, only one of those can be all the various plastic waste and the packaging and other stuff, which is very challenging. So the designers have eliminated a lot of that problem by not selecting carpets or some products that inherently are more wasteful. we're left with wood, and that can be recycled. So we send that to essentially get burned. There's a biomass facility. Ceiling tiles can get recycled. Drywall can get recycled. A lot of these other products can get recycled. All the steel and wiring, and some gets reused, and some things we've salvaged from other projects. So we've got a shed for the agricultural building that we bought completely used. It was an old horse barn. So that's one of the other benefits, is there's a lot of savings in that. It would be more expensive for us to build it, and it's a beautiful little shed. As we come up onto this building, I think Oliver's on the line, so he can give you a bit more technical information on this WRB. So we've got the Mento wrap with Tuscan Vanna tape, and that on the exterior barrier, it provides a really fantastic vapor open. So it allows all the vapor to escape and eliminating any water ingress into the building. And then we've also got this strapped, so all the siding will sit off the wall, and it will provide a ventilation channel behind it, so that has a chance to dry out.
Adam, do you want to let Oliver have a little, give a little bit of background about this material?
Sure.
Yeah, there's not much to say here at this point. He said it well. Mento 1000 on the outside as the weather barrier, and it's not a conventional one. It is a very high performance weather barrier, a monolithic membrane, not microporous, and that gives this project really high performance weather protection, in addition to very high level of air tightness and very reliable vapor control. So you get that energy efficiency, the durability, and of course it's going to play a big role in the health and comfort of the buildings as well.
And part of our sequence here is we've got very simple structures. So they're very easy to wrap. Insulate, provide that complete barrier. So underneath there's stego, essentially a plastic wrap that goes under the entire slab. It wraps up onto the side of the framing. This will then get taped to the plywood, which again you can see is FSC. And then all the seams of the plywood get taped. And then we still put the Mento wrap on top of that and tape all of those seams. And this gets wrapped up onto the roof, and then the whole roof gets wrapped as well. So there's multiple layers of kind of that air barrier and vapor control. So we can roll inside and have a look at some of these wall assemblies. So this is one of the dorm modules. You've got a central kind of common corridor. All these, there's some bathrooms on this side, and then the bunk rooms on each side here. Right when you walk in, there's a walk-off mat, so that's what this little depression is. So we'll pop these 2x out and eventually put that in. This floor will be the finished floor. On the second floor, it gets a topping, 2-inch concrete topping as well. And interestingly, that was, the LBC has its challenges as well as its perks. So one of them being that we struggle to get a lot of FSC products. They don't make a lot of flooring that's finished flooring that's reasonably priced, and a number of other things that are just hard to source. So. In the actual dorm room, we've got these two closets on each side, and then you walk in and there'll be 2 bunk beds on each end. And this was the window Drew was talking about. So these giant windows let a lot of light in, nice big tall ceilings. The whole project has double wall assembly. So you've got an exterior 2x6 wall, interior 2x4 wall. These ones in the dorms have these little blockouts too. We're going to have some recessed shelving in there. So there'll be 1 bed here. You put your phone, a book, your glasses, and then the second bunk will be up here, and there's another one. So these will get filled with blown cellulose. And another Oliver 475 product will be Intello Plus, which will be applied to the inside, which is another vapor barrier that's reinforced so they can fill the cavity with blown cellulose. In here we can get a little better view of some of the plumbing. Again, the same cast iron that goes all the way up through. So I believe to date we've submitted about 1,000 products to Kaplan Thompson and the materials researcher, and I probably have about 600 that are approved. So this whole iterative material selection process is pretty time consuming. There's a lot of products that either definitely don't make the standard, maybe some that you think make the standard and then don't, and then others that just there's declare statements and other elements that they're previously approved, so you know they comply. So that one has been quite a challenge on the construction side, is really dialing in what is and isn't compliant and what we can and can't use. And sometimes it's been right down to the wire with certain things, and others we've had to go beyond and outside kind of the scope of what was originally planned in sourcing something that everyone thought may have been approved. So the siding, we originally were going to get local Eastern white cedar, but there are no FSC certified suppliers of that. So we had to kind of transition, keeping locally, we went with a pine product from Hancock. The other one that provided quite a bit of challenge was the roofing, which even with just simple Gavaloom roofing, there's lots of coatings on all of them, surprising, I think, everyone involved. So it took quite a while to source one that had an approved finish or a lack thereof of one of the more toxic finishes.
Hey, Adam, could I just talk a little bit about the choices we made in the wall panels? Because it ended up being kind of, we pandemic proofed some of our supply chain. Initially, the wall panels bid looked like it might be going to an out of state firm, but I had already been meeting with Kevin Hancock and really liked the idea of sourcing within state. And part of the challenge is just at that point, the Hancock panel shop wasn't comfortable with being able to fully execute the design. That just showed where the design team was nimble enough to just a few tweaks on the wall panel assembly, and then Hancock was comfortable with it. And actually the bid came in much lower. And now, we've got wall panels that are sourced with FSC Maine wood, and definitely you were saying, Adam, that you're familiar with some projects where you're waiting on materials from like the West Coast or even China or Europe. And here we were waiting on panels from just a few towns over. So, I mean, that really was a great example of how the Living Building Challenge and its focus on sourcing local materials really made it somewhat pandemic proof in terms of supply chain.
Yeah, and I think expanding on that a little bit, it also simplified that whole process because Hancock wasn't able to do some of the really complicated wall assemblies. They basically showed up with two different walls, like the exterior and the interior, and we just placed both of those, as opposed to the whole thing being a sandwich that shows up that then you're struggling to get in and install some of these structural elements. So on the construction side, it helped us, and as Drew mentioned, it supported a local company, and because they were able to supply everything really quickly, it also pandemic proofed this project to that degree. So,
Adam, I wonder if we maybe could take a couple questions. There's a couple questions that have come up. I think Meredith has her eye on those that are specific to the site.
Yeah, certainly.
Or Meredith, go ahead.
So one of the attendees, there's clearly some passive house people, and they want to, as you talked about the many air barriers, they want to know which is your primary air barrier. Do you have a primary air barrier?
I could answer that if you wanted.
Go ahead.
Sure. We've got the opportunity to have many air barriers. You can have as many air barriers as you want as long as you are And each one is better and better because we're trying to keep the envelope tight, but controlling the moisture migration through the assembly is the important part. So, Adam pointed out that on the inside is going to get an Intello wrap, which is a vapor variable profile, and Oliver could probably talk your ear off about that too if you want. But essentially, what it's going to do is allow water vapor when it gets wet. It's going to seal up and keep that humidity from entering the assembly, and then when it dries, it's going to open up and allow it to escape if it did get inside. So that's our vapor control layer. And then on the outside, we tape and seal the sheathing as an air sealing control measure that is still vapor open, and then having the Mento plus the Mento 1000 on top of that is another layer of both weather protection and for bulk moisture that gets in through the siding, and also air sealing. So we have 3 air sealing layers essentially, and 1 vapor control layer, which is on the inside, which is on the warm side, which is where we want it in our cold climate. Back to you, Adam.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Unless there were more questions. I'm sorry.
There was one question from early on, if you could take that one. Somebody asked the sticky stuff. What is a sticky stuff that you were talking about early on that is compliant? Could you just name a product with red?
Yeah, so I mean, anything that's sticky is basically where the chemicals come in. You look at wood, and that's a very simple product. Concrete, the aggregate in it is simple and local, and I mean, there's embodied carbon in harvesting it, but that we have to build with something. So with concrete, the additives that essentially the admixtures get really technical, and there's some that have some really nasty stuff in it and some that don't. So I don't actually recall the specific products that we used for that, but even things along the lines of the form oil that prevents the formwork, the concrete from sticking to the formwork. We use an orange-based product. And the other sticky stuff, all the sealants, all the glues, like Titebond wood glue is okay, but there are other construction adhesives that aren't. All of what we pointed out in the Commons basement, all of that Grace product, you're trying to waterproof something, so there's just things that off gas and are generally not compliant. So of all of them that we have of all the different products out there, there's a very, very small percentage of those that we can use. So part of the challenge is usually figuring out what those are. Right now, the Living Building Challenge is still relatively new. I think there might be about 25 different projects in the world that have their certification. So this database that isn't open source but is somewhat available is not doesn't have a lot of things on them, just by nature of only having 25 other projects. So we have to, one of the big cost drivers on this at this stage in the LBC certification is just kind of going through and vetting all of these different products.
If I might just add one comment, which is that with Proclima products that we represent at 475, you're not having to make a choice between high performance and health. You can have both. And with the Tescon Vanatape, which of course performs as exceptionally airtight and has exceptional durability, it is also a red list free component that is not only red list free, but actually has achieved the declare label. So that makes it easy to achieve high performance for these Living Building Challenge projects.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. I mean, you will notice, I'm not going to name names, but a lot of buildings now have a greener hue to the plywood, and we can't use that because it does not comply. So that's where a lot of 475 products are. They're great to work with, great for the environment, great for the people that are using them, so they're not slathering themselves in some of these chemicals. So do we have any more questions?
There's been a question about how have the subcontractors responded to the living building challenge.
That's a good one.
And that's
Generally-
actually from Kathleen Smith at International Living Future Institute. So great question, Kathleen.
So the contractors have been really good. We have, and I think it's kind of a self-fulfilling sequence, because the contractors that aren't good, or we struggle with, and they don't do their submittals and they don't do some of their legwork, and they're not good on the paperwork side, they didn't want anything to do with this project, and we didn't want them to have anything to do with this project. So what we're left with is some of the best subcontractors in our pool, and they have the capability to manage this, to the patience to kind of go through a lot of these iterations when we send constant feedback that says, you can't use that product, you can't use that product, find a different one, think outside the box, what can we do for this? So they've been really great. By and large, they're all really interested in it, and really appreciate the process and the meaning behind it. So I think the big one, the selling point that seems to work for everyone is, in the construction industry is both very wasteful and very toxic with all the stuff that we're exposed to, that we're cutting and like I said, smearing and slathering and everything else. So just the fact that we have less nasty chemicals that these guys and girls are going to be wearing and bringing home with them, I think everyone's appreciative of that fact. So.
I think one thing Adam and I have talked to, and if Kathleen, you're still on the line, we'd love to talk with International Living Future Institute in the future about a more open source way for subcontractors to access and figure out what's red list and what's not. So it's overall, I mean, we moved it ahead, but definitely not. We were definitely warned by other folks that probably the biggest challenge of living building challenge is the vetting of materials. But we're big problem solvers, this whole design team in Zachau Construction, Ecology School, and we're already excited about, yeah, at some point, Kathleen, you and I should talk about open sourcing of materials and stuff. Adam's got some great ideas on that. I noticed actually one other question was about ventilation. I was about to bring that up myself because that's come up just recently because of the air tightness of the passive house construction is getting humidity, dealing with humidity has been huge. So Adam, can I turn that over to you on how we've dealt with that just recently?
Yeah, that one was kind of a late game changer. You know, we had a system in place with a mechanical design and essentially value engineered some items out. And then it kind of came into view that this was going to be much more multi-purpose with everyone from kids to adults and full year. And that kind of, the funny part of that was kids are pretty adaptable and resilient. And if the dorm was a little hot and a little humid, they were going to be okay, but the adults were not. So we kind of transitioned into something that provided more individual control. Originally, it was going to be the whole, essentially each floor would be on one zone. But what that meant is if you were in one room and the thermostat was in another, it would not respond to either you heating the place up or not being warm enough. So we transitioned to individual heat pump heads in each room with control there, which interestingly was a net savings on that aspect because there's much less ductwork involved in that. And ductwork is one of those trades that there's not as many people going into, so there's a lot more challenges and you pay a lot more just because of that. Again, probably a common theme with a lot of passive house stuff is you create such a tight structure. Unlike the old 700s house that you're in, where there's almost open gaps and the air can flow through and dry things out, you don't get that here. So then we had to add in a dehumidification system to kind of combat the fact that we weren't going to be using a lot of heat, but people were going to be transpiring or respiring and breathing and exhaling a lot of humid moisture and the showers and everything else. We needed to ventilate all of that.
So there is a central ERP ventilation system with dehumidification in it to take care of all of that. It is tied into the showers and everything.
So it seems we're about coming to the end of our time with the tour. Adam, do you have anything more that's still on your list and your clipboard there?
Well, the clipboard's more to hold the mic for me. I think that's the gist of it. I mean, I think we should definitely revisit this once we have the commons and a bit more of the finishes in place. But this is certainly a good model to come see of the of what we have in place for the exterior WRB.
Yep, looks great. And I want to give a shout out to our cameraman there, John Dean, behind the camera. John Dean's of Emerald Builders.
Naomi, can I just do a little bit about landscaping, just a real quick, because right now all you're seeing, of course, is a construction zone. But the idea of the campus itself, our lower fields along the river are going to be the production fields. But, you know, having a half acre of onions or potatoes isn't necessarily inspirational for most people. So actually surrounding the dormitories and the dining commons are going to be smaller scale permaculture education gardens, like 5 by 5, 10 by 10, where we will be growing more food and herbs and wildflower pollinator gardens, a whole assortment of different landscaping that's beautiful, but also very functional. And the idea there is that people can walk out of the dorm or walk out of the dining common and say, wow, that's awesome. I want to go home and do that in my backyard, or I can do that as a school project, or even behind my office. So that's really, once the building gets done and we have time this fall to start landscaping, that's really where we'll put our effort in surrounding the beautiful buildings with beautiful landscaping that's functional and ecological.
Awesome. That's great.
To thank the two of you for walking us through the site. You really have done an excellent job. And Adam, you display with ease the degree of which you've had to learn the ins and outs of things at a depth of dive that you don't often need to do. So I really think you've done a great job walking us through the project. And I really appreciate the opportunity to have a beautiful day and share the walkthrough with everybody here too. So thank you both very much on site for this great tour.
Yeah, and hopefully you guys all get to come down and visit sometime soon as well, even if only individually in ones and twos.
There you go. All right. So I think we'll circle back to the panelists. First, I have a little bit of some basic little chores associated with this. I have two polls I want to put out at the moment. It's very basic. Where are you watching from? And just go ahead and fill that out. Just give us 10 or 15 seconds to do that. That's helpful for us. Anybody else need or want to fill in? I'm gonna count to 5, 4, 3, and 2, and 1. We're gonna end that one. Can share the results. You can see that. Mostly from Southern Maine. A few from the Midwest and the West Coast. And then I want to just do one more. Poll 2, just to let us know who's watching, what your professions are, what your connections are. Give you a couple more seconds to do that. Five, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Thank you. You can share those results so you can see who's here. Thank you for filling those two things out. And now I just have to give a little shout out to passivhausMAINE. And one of the challenges in this current time is how are we reworking our revenue streams. Our events are not the same as they used to be. Putting on this event was an experiment that seems to be working really well. And I'm going to offer you guys the opportunity to go ahead and donate. I'm going to put a donate link to our website in the chat box, and I'll just leave it there. You guys, just give you the opportunity to support an organization that's working really hard to find our way in these next few months and this next year. Our whole budget for the coming year is a bit of a question mark, and I'll put it there and leave it. And meanwhile, let's flip the event back to the panelists. Now we have some questions. Starting the question, I'm not sure if you guys in your conversation before, if you went further into detail, but the first topic of conversation was going to be about the administration and the design team, the unique approach, how and why. And you guys already touched on that a little bit, but maybe Drew, you want to just circle back to that and then give our architects an opportunity to respond.
All right. Am I unmuted now? Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, part of it was to figure out who's going to be the cat herder, and that ended up being Jesse Thompson at Kaplan Thompson. But I really have been impressed. We actually, the design team presented at the Living Future, the annual International Living Future Institute conference every May. And last year, some of us were out in Seattle. And Ryan and Chris and Danielle and Jesse presented. And when they started out their workshop, and it was about collaboration, when they mentioned that there were 3 firms working together, I heard an audible gasp from the room full of architects. And I looked around, I'm not an architect, so I don't know. Afterward, I said, why was there a gasp? And I don't know if it was Ryan, I think it was Ryan said, well, most architects don't work together firm to firm. So I'm glad we broke new ground on that too. So I don't know if you guys, Danielle, Ryan, Chris, have any further information, because I think you've come up with some really interesting mechanisms of how to keep the communication flowing and have the design work out.
Yeah, it's been a real eye opener, and I think if there were 3 firms in the world that could do this, we would be those 3 firms. I mean, just Maine has this great green community of designers and professionals who love to share knowledge and really do what's good for the planet. And that means oftentimes putting your ego aside. And so, you know, there's some humble pie that we all ate during this process where, you know, our peers are, you know, guiding us, and so you have to, you know, listen as well as speak and talk, and everyone brought, you know, their A game to it. So it's an honor just to be among them. And
I would second that. I'm also really just feel happy to have an opportunity to be a part of this team. I think that it's been a really functional team. I think that it's a good mix of experience and personality. I think we're kind of remiss for not having Jesse here, because he did take on and agree to the challenge of how do you actually manage across all of this. And I think that Danielle is actually the one who's felt the challenge of making sure we're actually getting done what we need to and plugging it in together in the way it needed to come together. And I think she's really been the star from the Living Building Challenge perspective, and been a pleasure to work with everyone on the team.
I think one thing that really speaks to the collaboration, we had to do 2 rounds of value engineering, which before this project, I had no idea what VE meant. Basically means cost cutting. We did 1 round last spring of about 1.6 million, and then in the fall another 1.5. So we did $3.1 million worth of VE, and that's where the really tough choices had to be made, and the architects had to be nimble into rethinking some things, just because, I mean, we basically you know, the last few years, we were looking at this incredible spike in construction costs. So the fact that we were able to do $3.1 million worth of VE, and yet we never dropped the living building challenge. The buildings are still beautiful. Their function, a lot of local materials. So that really is a huge shout out to the design, the creativity and the nimbleness of the design team to, even with the challenge of our fiscal boundaries and restraints, they were able to make it happen.
Danielle, were we easy enough to deal with, or were we truly the cats?
It was a learning curve for sure, but overall it seemed to be go pretty well.
Oh.
And I think also having an advantage of two different design teams is there's going to be a diversity of design on the site between the different buildings.
Well, we prepared just a few things to walk through the buildings in a little bit more. I think we should go through those quickly and leave some room to take any additional questions. I've seen some things come through, some on the site level. And I think this may open up a little bit of the thought about how we actually take seriously those ideas of energy and water, and actually not making things less bad, but actually rounding over the burden and trying to contribute or give back to the projects. These are from the old facility, just some pictures of the commons where the meals currently are held, but then the actual classrooms, everything happens outdoors. So that was a unifying part of the overall programming. There's a picture, there's a well-known ecologist locally who talks about reading the landscape called Tom Wessel, there was a detailed site walk done through the site where you could learn about the history, which trees were blown over in the hurricane in 1938, and how this one stand of ill pines still exists. It is really fascinating. And the thing that I love is on the slide where we have that reference to the Tom Wessel study, it's Tom Wessel on one side and a sandwich on the other, because tying it back to the direct and lived experience of the children is really a part of the mission of the school. And the commons really is a space, the one space where everyone gets together, and the dorms are really conceived of as a place for really just for the overnighting, and they have a real approach to efficiency and how the space is utilized. And we had strict square footage limitations on the overall development site within the portion of the site we were able to develop, which actually pinned our footprints down from the very beginning, which honestly held us to a very strict diet. And Chris, I don't know if you'd like to take the lead and run us through a little bit of the enclosures and energy on the projects.
Sure. Well, I think we got a good dose of the panelization there on site, just so that you know, it's basically a double wall constructed wall assembly with roof trusses, and that is true for both buildings. And the interesting thing is when we first started designing this building, we designed the enclosure first, where we knew we were building walls and roofs, and we had a general idea of the shape of the buildings. And so before really designing the buildings, it was like, okay, we're going to define the wall assembly, and it's going to be the same for both. And we're going to make it so that these two buildings are one project and of the same genus and species, and not foreign. It'll be, you know, a different ecology over there at the commons than it is over the dorms, but it's still in the same greater ecology. I'm ruining that, aren't I, Drew? But you get what I mean. So it's two buildings, but it's one system. And we had the approach that we were going to be panelizing this project, and we thought we were doing that for cost efficiency and also because of the time frame in which it would be going up. But that time frame got dramatically changed. But then, but the other factors did not, and panelization turned out to be a really strong tool for this. For the delivery of this project. And I think Drew even alluded to that and how that's even working out from a COVID-19 standpoint. And then being that these buildings are going to be, this whole project has to be net positive, not just net zero, but actually make more energy than it produces, and being water positive as well. But that means these buildings have to use less. And so the energy demand is really the focus of the attention of the enclosures, and that is to, this is in Maine, it needs a winter jacket. There's so many buildings that have these little light jackets on, and it doesn't work. So, to have this low energy demand so that we can then provide that energy via renewables and solar, we need a robust exterior enclosure of double studs, very thick insulation. And then because it's a living building challenge, we're doing that in a bio-based way. We learn that the more bio-based our products are, and the fewer products that we use throughout the entire building, the better we do with the Living Building Challenge materials pedal and the material selection. So for every product that we decide to investigate and look at, that meant a lot of work, especially for Danielle here. And so minimizing the number of products was a big part of that. And from a life cycle analysis, having them bio-based is also important. And then once our energy our demand is low enough, then it's really a factor of fine tuning that and finding out how much renewables we're gonna need. And so what the design team did was energy model the buildings, and we used WFI to do that. It's a program that passivhausMAINE US uses to help certify passive house projects. So you'll see X's on the side, that's where and check marks. You can ignore those because this is not a passive house project, but we did have this goal of bringing the energy down to a point that is manageable and usable and easy enough to be net positive. And so this is a report card of the two buildings, and maybe the big takeaway here is that you can see that the Commons definitely uses a substantial more amount of energy, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Ryan will talk about that, about it has a kitchen in it, and for the dorms, really the kids are heating the building along with the sun, so it's a breeze to heat. And so the final number there on the report card is the site energy, which can be translated as the EUI of 35.5 for the dorms and 103.3 for the commons, and that's 1,000 BTUs per square foot per year. And so the entire energy allotment breaks down this way, where the blue is the commons and the orange is the dorms, and then you'll see we have some other smaller things, which is site lighting, and then the EVSE, which is the vehicle charging on site, and then miscellaneous others. So you can see that the Commons building is really the one that's the hungriest for the energy. I'll let you talk about that, Ryan.
Okay. Well, the Commons building has two primary reasons why it is a significant energy user on site. In the last slide, one other thing that was noted, and I think this will get to the eventual questions about wastewater management, there was a fairly substantial amount of energy going into the other, and it's not site lighting. There's actually active energy consumption in the wastewater, but essentially it was done to reduce the impact in the overall size of the required septic system. The regulatory environment in the state of Maine did not allow us to move to doing a fully alternative wastewater treatment system. The included valving and options to be able to switch over to that design if that time ever comes, but we had to produce a design that was based on simple tried and true technology, but luckily the idea of drawing water from a site and returning it to a site, if you meet all the quality requirements, traditional wastewater management practices are well within the bounds of what ILFI was looking for the Living Building Challenge. But the energy consumption of the Commons is driven largely in part by the fact that it's roughly a 200-person occupancy dining room. And what's really remarkable about the dining commons for the Ecology School among Living Building Challenge schools is they are a from scratch cooking operation, creating 3 meals a day for all of those occupants. So there is a real prioritization of food and experience in education. And as such, the chef really strongly believes about making all of the food from scratch. There's a major baking load. And it's also keyed very much into the long-term plan with the on-site agriculture to offset or supply for a large percentage of the food used, the produce used in the production. I shouldn't just say produce. Actually, I think there are plans for chickens and eggs and pigs down the line. The energy consumption in the kitchen, this is actually an earlier design of the kitchen if you really were paying lots of attention to what was going on within the space. You really see is this servery space in between the dinings and the kitchen, but it is a very intensely supplied kitchen. And in order to do the energy calculations, we had to go through every single piece of energy, every single piece of equipment and what its energy consumption would be based on its amperage draw, its hours of operation, the actual temperature set the ovens would be on. It was down to that level of the weeds. There are some really interesting and exciting European technologies and induction kettles and pieces like that. There is no combustion in the current kitchen, so there's no gas in there whatsoever. It is a purely electric cooking kitchen. Made it actually, it's complicated to go through each piece of equipment, but it made it easy to correlate it back to the energy demand and the offset that would come from the eventual PV arrays. Like I said, I had mentioned earlier that the design drivers, the south-facing porch was a big design driver for the dining room. The inversion of the salt box to create that large collection area was also part of the direction for informing the design direction for the commons. It turns out the capacity of production, it is a reasonable offset, but it is a small portion of the overall on-site energy production. And what actually happens, just to give perspective to some of these individual decisions, is as we get into these and we start looking at the requirements for kettles and convection ovens and dishwashers in particular, we are able to do a side-by-side with the dorm and see the relative energy consumption of both projects and see how much of the energy consumption in the commons is actual process energy. One thing to remember is the bulk of the hot water is process energy. You should actually probably say all of it. In the ventilation, we went through efforts to source efficient hoods and ventilation systems, but it's a balanced makeup air unit, and it does actually take a fair amount of energy to offset or pre-temper the air that's coming in to meet the exhaust on the full exhaust in the hoods. Done a fair amount of kitchens, but this was the most I ever had to get into it with the chef about how many hours a day are you using the oven? How many hours a day are you using this fixture, and trying to help work all through the energy demand on that. And that really all came down to, just like bear in mind the amount of energy being consumed by the dorms. This one piece of equipment. This is a conveyor-fed high temp dishwasher for the commons. The offset here is it does a good job. It doesn't take a lot of staff to maintain and work this. So that is a real concern for operations within the school by and large. But this single piece of equipment, roughly between the preheated hot water demand and the direct energy that it uses to kick that water up with its got like a 17 kV, it's an incredible heater boosting element right inside the tank. It's almost uses as much energy as the dorm with this one piece of equipment. So you really have to think about every decision to a level. So this is a piece that's very important to the commons going forward. And you can make the correlation on what the related PV is, just based on the overall percentage of energy consumption that goes back to that one piece of equipment.
Ryan, we've had people say, well, you've got lots of kids. You can make them do the dishes. I remember when I was a kid at 4-H camp, we had to do the dishes. But nowadays, especially given, the dynamics of the pandemic and health and human safety, we really need that high-end dishwasher, even if it's taking as much, if not more, electricity than the whole dorm.
Well, Drew, you often talk about many of the students who come through have never had this experience of walking by the field and seeing the vegetables they're going to eat later that day, or actually seeing the eggs come from from the chicken coop. So it's part of the education and experience that helps connect people to the program and the site.
Well, even the idea of kids eating family style meals in the dining hall, sitting down and passing around dishes and saying please and thank you and helping to set and clear the table. And I think I appreciate, I think you folks at Scott Simon started calling, we were just going to call it the dining hall. You started calling it the dining commons, which is such a better, the idea of the commons, which is a New England ideal anyway, of people coming together and shared use. So I love that idea of the dining commons.
Well, just
You want to wrap up? So I don't mean to rush you to wrap up, but I want to make sure we have some chance for questions.
We'll wrap it up.
I was about to wrap it up. This last image is just the general sense of the overall PV arrays. It all ties back to the amount of energy that we had in here. You don't see the rooftop array in this. You see 2 ground mounted arrays. We've been able to consolidate them to 1 and find a bit of efficiency there. But I just thought it was worth sharing this to get a general sense of scale of the requirements of creating on-site renewable energy for the project. So Naomi, are you going to be moderating for the remaining questions that we are backlog?
Meredith is going to
There aren't too many questions left. I see there was a, did you get any exceptions for materials because there just wasn't anything on the market that feasibly met the living building challenge requirements?
Yeah, so the sticky stuff like mastics, adhesives generally were due diligence cases, meaning we had to look at 3 equivalent products of the same product type, and if we still couldn't find one that was LBC compliant, we could use one of those 3. So mainly that was like plumbing valves was a huge one. That was a due diligence section. Electrical, fire rated access doors was one of them. So the building envelope itself was all LVC compliant, but it's just a lot of like the electrical and plumbing guts that there just aren't compliant products that exist.
I noticed that the, we started off saying that living building challenge requires that it's passive house level buildings, but then when you showed the energy modeling of the buildings, you said, don't worry about the fact that it doesn't meet the standard because we're not doing passive house. So what's that about?
All right. Well, it's basically that the principles of the passive house apply no matter whether you're doing, the principles of the passive house are to reduce energy demand and do that through a robust exterior envelope that's properly air sealed with balanced ventilation and very efficient systems, and using the sun whenever you can to heat the building or shade it to keep it cool. And so all those principles are still at play. And I should, you get an X mark for being, 2 kilowatt hours or 2 kBTUs per square foot over the passive house, you get an X, but that's still, those are still very good numbers that we saw on the report card. So there's a certain point at which, you will spend more adding more insulation or doing something different to your building than you would to, say, add on another solar panel for that same cost benefit analysis from the global warming perspective or the energy usage perspective. And so there is sort of a judgment call of how you achieve that. So while this may not, well, the dorm probably with a little more work could have been a passive house. The commons, the amount of energy that it uses to, fire up that dishwasher right there is going to make it a real challenge to be a passive house. But again, that wasn't the goal, but being efficient and net positive was.
And I would offer a couple of follow-ons on that one question, just that we were seeking guidance on how you make provisions for the process ventilation associated with commercial kitchen operations. We do have otherwise, other than the kitchen side of it, we do have balanced ventilation, shading on south glazing in the exact same envelope. Actually, in some ways, a slightly heavier or greater thermal resistance envelope on the commons. But the driver was just so largely in the process side of the kitchen operations. If you compare the EUI against CBEX and 2030 challenge numbers, it's really, really high performance. There are some other LBC, 2 or 3 other LBC kitchens, and their EUIs were in the same range. I think one was slightly higher, one was slightly lower, but both of them did significantly less cooking on site. Naomi, you were. I thought you had a comment or a question, Naomi. I apologize.
No, well, of course, I always have questions, and I could ask them. I don't know if there's maybe, Meredith, if there's a couple more from our audience.
Yeah, I see that. I'm figuring out how this works. I see the jumped if there was any bit of an answer, but one of them was, can you follow up on which products were changed during construction? I was thinking, probably during value engineering, just were there any sort of general lessons learned as to economic approach? Was what I assume that question is referring to.
Well, some of the products that we specified that we knew were LBC compliant, we found out there was like a minimum order that we couldn't meet. So we would have to be ordering a bunch of extra material in order to get it, which wouldn't make sense. Some of the products we thought would be an easy approval, such as the sheet metal roofing, but then because we thought it was just going to be straight gavelin with no finish. And then we found out, oh, all metal roofing, even if it's unfinished, has a finish on it. So we had to change that around. And then there were some that we just didn't realize we needed in the project. So like various adhesives and sealants would come up that we'd have to hunt for a specific product for quickly.
One thing that's interesting is when we made system selections like the cast iron drain pipe, that's great. Seems like you have a solution that solves the problem, but then what are the boots? What are the connections? What are the fittings? And all of those unthought about smaller parts that fit into the specifications were really some of the hardest points to keep up with.
Yeah, and some items were, Adam alluded to it earlier, they're part of a system. So if you mix and match different products that are part of a system, you lose the warranty on the entire system. So you can't really do that. So understanding that as part of the CA process has been a challenge. For example, on the screen here, all the TPO products are part of the Firestone system. And it's listed approved as noted because some products are approved for outside the air barrier, but you couldn't necessarily decorate with them on the inside.
I think from the owner's standpoint, the material one that was really a tough call was the siding. We really tried to get Maine Atlantic white cedar. It just wasn't, and the idea of shipping, Pacific red cedar across the country because it was for stewardship counts certification just seemed like a no-go. So, it wasn't what we wanted, but I think now going with Maine white pine and staining it was the right decision.
Naomi, I think that was all the questions. I think I've asked them all.
Great.
Great. Well, and that's perfect timing because it's just 6 o'clock. So I wanted to do one more poll, if I can do, please. And that is to help us with our planning for these next few months, including, importantly, our fall forum. We really would love to see what is this kind of programming worth to you? How can we reasonably continue our revenue stream in a way that's meaningful and resonates with our audience? So if you don't mind just giving a rough sense of what would be good. Meanwhile, I think I'm going to try to share my screen if I can do that.
Yeah, and I need to stop the share that I have up, which is really just the full team. You're only seeing a portion of the full team here. I will stop my share.
Okay. And I will do mine. So I wanted to thank our annual sponsors, and we always thank them because they're really make all the difference in terms of our overall operations throughout the year. And then particularly for this event, we had underwriting specifically from 475, Briburn, Kaplan Thompson, and Scott Simons, and Materially Better joined us from Western Mass, and we're really grateful for their support from all of these folks. And then I wanted to give a double thank you for the volunteers who we didn't even see, but John behind the camera and Meredith helping us with the questions. Really, really appreciate that. And then, of course, to all of our panelists, the amount of prep was surprisingly large, and I really appreciate all the time that you all took and the quality presentation that you put together. I know that Adam and John and I were down on site 2 or 3 times, which was amazing, really fun, but also takes a lot of time. And so I appreciate all of the efforts from everybody who participated in this event. And I want to thank all of our attendees for coming and trying this new system out. I'm sure we're going to do something similar or different, but anyway, it'll probably be virtual for the coming months anyway. We'll see how our fall forum comes about, but we definitely have to plan on some virtual elements of that just to be safe. Any final thoughts from our panelists?
Other than thank you, Naomi, for your
You're welcome.
doing this, and passivhausMAINE.
Woo woo. All right. Just for, yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, everybody. Have a nice evening and nice week, and we'll be in touch.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Take care, everyone. Come visit us at Riverbend.